This is now the third anniversary event. As you can see by the timings, we have missed some of the early part. To try and catch up a bit, I'll not give a big spiel about what the transition was. If you want to find out later on, we've got the tables at the side. What we'll do this evening is we will have an introduction, introduce you to one of the projects, the Frodsham Sings, then it's the energy debate. For the debate, we've got the University of Chester, we've got Joe Howe and Roy Alexander, and for Peel Energy, we've got Muir Miller, who's the MD of Peel Energy. Again, all of these people will be available after the questions and answers. We can talk to them. And then at the question and answers, we've then got the breakouts where all of the other stalls will be available. We can move the chairs round, the bar will be opened, and we can just go on until we're ready to be thrown out. At this moment now, I'd like to pass the mic over to Mark Warren, who is the chair of the Frodsham Council.
Thanks, Graham. I'm sorry, I'm just not clever enough to cut these things, so I've actually penned a few words on the iPad. A very warm welcome to Frodsham, everybody. In terms of energy and resource, we've got a lot around here. There's a lot within a mile or two, and there's a considerable amount probably just under our feet. Frodsham has something else that, in fact, we adopted at the Town Council on Monday night, and that is a vision statement. And an integral part of that vision statement is that we have an informed and educated community here. To that end, we've contributed the funds to have this meeting recorded and hopefully rebroadcast on the internet through social media. And that way we've got a record of it really in perpetuity for the community to refer to. The names are probably forgotten by most people now, but we don't have to think back far to just go back to last year, in fact, and recall the media frenzy that surrounded the communities of Balcombe down south and Barton Moss. Informed communities are resilient communities. We need Frodsham to be a resilient community to deal with all the challenges that we're going to face. I want to thank organisations like the Frodsham Transition Initiative, bringing this event together. It all adds to community resilience. And indeed the players in the energy industry themselves coming to an event like this and preparing their case. It all adds to the knowledge in the community. We need that knowledge. I'd like to think that going forward, we will be treated by the energy industry as an informed community in the subsequent debates that face us. Now, there's a variety of stalls around the room, all good stuff, and a load of interesting things there. There's something on everybody's seat, and it's a flyer for something called the Neighbourhood Plan, and I'm going to be a little bit unashamed in the plug and I put in for this now. We've just kicked off the neighbourhood planning process in Frodsham. It's a community-driven process. It's not going to be written by the council, it's going to be written by you, the community. It will aid the council in any planning decisions. And what the neighbourhood plan is it's the use of the tracts of land that sit within Frodsham at the moment. If you arrive down in the station car park and you wonder what we've got a waste recycling centre there for and think of somewhere better for it, that's part of the neighbourhood plan. If you wonder how we're going to squeeze in the 250 new houses that we've been told we have to squeeze in the next 15 years and still cater for the ever-increasing demands for car parking spaces, that's part of the neighbourhood plan. If you wonder how we're going to make Frodsham a destination rather than just a place people pass through on the way to the Delamere Forest, where we're lucky if they stop for a pint of beer on the way home with their bikes on the back of the car, then that's the neighbourhood plan. There's a launch event on Saturday the 28th of March, and I would urge you to participate in this process. Like I say, the plan isn't written by the council, it's written by the community, and that's you. So please participate. That's about all I had to say. Enjoy the choir. I think there's a special treat, unless I'm mistaken, with respect to participants in the choir this evening. And I'll hand it back to Graham.
Thank you. Together response. This is the first time that the majority of these people here, in front of you, these good people, have sung in public. There's a very few number that have been in choir before. I just want to lower your expectations. We're going to just do you 2 or 3 songs. There's a great group of people. I think we've got about 40 signed up now from a very small corps, which we're really delighted about. If you want to come along, we have got to stand somewhere, haven't we? Yes, yeah. And come and join us on Saturday morning, you'll be very welcome, even if you can't sing.
Especially if you can't.
2 or 3 pieces. We've been delighted to come top in the Frodsham Community Ideas Fund, and I hope some of you out there voted for us. And we will eventually, won't we, get a grant?
You will.
We will get it eventually. And the round table have supported as well, which is fabulous, because it's communities, clubs and societies helping other community clubs and societies. That's great. So what we're going to do is sing you 2 or 3 things until we get all our equipment. That's all I can afford. But we had to sing one song first.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, FTI. Happy birthday to you.
So when I took over on the 14th of January or something like that, we had no piano. So I thought, what am I going to do? So I looked on Gareth Malone's site, because he's always a good sign, isn't he? What would we do without Gareth? And I found something that I could print off for free and not breach copyright, and it's 3 spirituals, but they're going to try and sing them all together. So you've got to spot what they are.
I'm going to sing.
1, 2, 3.
I'm gonna sing, sing, sing. I'm gonna dance, dance, dance. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna dance. Hallelujah. When the gates are open wide, I'll be standing by your side. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna dance. Hallelujah. I'm gonna sing, sing, sing. I'm gonna dance, dance, dance. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna dance. Hallelujah. When the gates are open wide, I'll be standing by your side. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna dance. Hallelujah. When the saints are marching in, when the saints go marching in, I'm gonna be in life's number. When the saints go marching in, when the saints go marching in, when the saints go marching in, when the saints go I'm gonna sing, sing, sing. I'm gonna dance, dance, dance. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna dance. Hallelujah. When the gates are open wide, I'll be standing by your side. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna dance. Hallelujah.
We all finish together. That always happens. So I'll just adjust my technical equipment. Okay, right. We want a wade, don't we? Want a D? Wading. This is Wade in the Water. And again, it's 3 songs that try and sing together. Don't outdo yourselves. 1, 2, 3, and...
Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Why don't you wade in the water? Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Lost on travel from home. Why don't you sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Lost on travel from home. Why don't you sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Lost on travel from home. Why don't you sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Lost on travel from home. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Lost on travel from home. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
Right, now we're going to the 60s. Speed it up a bit. We're getting modern now. We will get modern though when we have that equipment. Keep plugging. Don't me to bug him. Right, this one I don't think needs any introduction, just in case it goes wrong. Okay, yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run, run.
Told you. No. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run. Okay. Okay. Second time lucky. 1, 2, 3, and
Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run. Do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, 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 do run, run.
Over to Joe.
Okay, good evening everyone. My name is Joe Howe. I'm the Director and Professor of the Thornton Energy Institute at the University of Chester, and I work on the former Shell Technology Centre Park called the Thornton Science Park at the moment over in Thornton. I've been asked this evening to talk primarily about some of the major global energy challenges that we face at the moment and some of the global energy demands to set the context for the rest of the panel this evening. So you're not going to be able to read that, but what that primarily says is that there are three key issues at the moment that we need to address in the world in relation to many issues associated with sustainable societies, and that is the issue of food, water and energy. Now, as a professor of energy, I would argue that energy is by far the most significant, but the three are actually intertwined. Energy is a key significant part of sustainable development for me. But there's a huge issue, and that's geographical, and that's why Professor Alexander's here this evening, is that the world consumes energy in different amounts in different places across the whole of the world. In the United States, for example, the average person in the United States consumes nearly 50 times as much as your average person consumes in Bangladesh. So there's significant inequalities and unevenness around the notion of energy consumption around the world at the moment. And one of the major challenges for the world is the developing world wants to consume more and more energy to catch up with perhaps the sort of lifestyles and consumption that we have in the developed world and in the West. And over time we'll see more and more energy being consumed. And at the moment around the world, 80% of that energy that we consume comes from fossil fuels. And so there are significant challenges around that when it comes to notions and issues of global environmental change. And that isn't going to go away. That isn't going to go away. And why I so really welcome issues like the Frodsham Transition Initiative, and it's something I'm passionate about and would want to be involved in it as your local professor, and there's an offer there. I'm very passionate about that, but it's an issue that we need to begin to develop the technologies around a more sustainable energy consumption so that as developing nations and developing countries want to consume more and more energy, there is a menu of different opportunities and different solutions that they can turn to ensure that they've got that energy resilience as they develop. That there is a slide which demonstrates how much different bodies and different organisations think the amount of energy that we consume will increase over the next 25 years. The International Energy Authority predicts that there will be a 35% increase in the amount of energy that we consume as a globe over the next 25 years. Companies such as BP think it's more likely to be a 40% increase. Now remember that my previous slide, my last slide, where I argued that at the moment 80% of the energy that we consume comes from fossil fuels. So there's almost going to be a continuation in the growth of the amount of carbon emissions that will take place during the course of the next 25 years. So in terms of what we need to do to address those particular challenges, well, first and foremost, what I would argue is that we need to develop technologies around carbon capture and carbon storage. Carbon capture and storage needs to be a pressing issue that we undertake work on right now. And I'm very proud to live in a country where my government does put a lot of funding into notions of carbon capture. And some of the work that's being done around different universities in the UK is actually world leading around that. But there is also a need for us to do more work around those technologies, and also some technologies and trials around carbon storage as well, so that we can lead the world in addressing the issues of carbon capture and storage. That's a terrible slide for you guys. Even in the front row, you've got no chance of reading that. But one of the issues that we will need to do in terms of demanding change is actually to manage our energy more efficiently over time. I'm really struck by the possibilities of actually managing the consumption of energy more efficiently, and I'm sure that Alex will come on to talk about that a little bit more when he comes on to his particular slide. But here I talk about the need for intelligent energy management systems. I talk about more efficient lighting. I talk about the need to develop more efficient combustion engines. one of my bones of contention is there is a need for governments to be more intelligent around the regulatory framework. I'm often struck by the inconsistent nature of considerable amounts of legislation. Now, a few years ago, there was a lot of subsidies put towards solar panels. And around solar panels in the UK, a whole industry set up around the development of those solar panels and the application of those solar panels and the deployment of those solar panels, because it was thought that there would be a consistent subsidy associated with them. And I very much welcomed that. But then overnight the government changed its mind, and a whole industry that had been set up suddenly went out of business, with devastating consequences for people employed in that industry, and devastating consequences for the communities that those people worked in. The slide on the right is around cars. I've been very struck and very much welcomed the fact that car engines and combustion engines over the last 20 years or so have become much more efficient and reducing the amount of carbon emissions associated with that efficiency. But at one and the same time, people have generally tended to drive larger cars, but also regulation demands more safety equipment in there, rightly or wrongly, but that has actually increased the amount of weight as well, which leads to greater energy consumption and more carbon emissions. So very often there are these inconsistencies around regulation that I would like to see being resolved at the government level. To provide us with energy resilience, I think we should demand a much greater energy mix, energy cocktail, energy menu, if you will, across from fossil fuels to more renewables. But one of the key dimensions that I personally would argue for is for issues around localised networks and localised energy systems. And that's why, again, I very much welcome the opportunity to talk to the Frodsham Transition Initiative, how you can build your own local resilience measures and local energy systems and local energy networks in a particular place. But on this side, what I'm trying to argue more than that is that at the moment, the level of the technologies that we have in place around renewables cannot possibly replace the fossil fuel consumption at the moment unless we see a significant shift towards nuclear. And that in its own right may raise significant questions for many communities. But we do need to develop further renewable technologies, and here I think things like solar, for instance, around the equator could offer significant potential. However, it's in the wrong place for where people consume the energy, which is in the northern hemisphere, some way away from where solar generation potentially has the possibility to generate most energy. I would argue that there is a need for us to dramatically increase nuclear. I am an academic associate of the National Nuclear Laboratory, I'm very proud of that fact, but nuclear might be one particular way in which we can address the issues of carbon emissions. But that in its own right doesn't come without complexities and without challenges. It's expensive. There could be problems associated with proliferation, and there are issues around acceptability and safety casing potentially as well that we'd need to address. So, as an academic, one of the things that I am absolutely passionate about around the uncertainties associated with these particular challenges and these particular demands is the pressing need for science, the pressing need for UK science, the pressing need for local science to inform local debate and local deliberations. And that's why I really welcome the opening comments this evening about the need for that science to inform local debates and local deliberations, to inform the local community, to generate that science, to work with industry, to work with government, to generate that science to inform public policy, to inform public debate, to take that science and cascade it down into my undergraduate and postgraduate curriculum, into CPD activities, continuing professional development activities for local industry. There's a real need for that to develop those particular skills. But there's also a need for us to look at these particular challenges and actually begin to come up with innovative technologies and innovative solutions to begin to address those particular challenges. So with the government funding that we've received at the University of Chester to establish an energy systems demonstrator at the Thornton Science Park, we're going to be working with small to medium-sized enterprises in the locality looking at those technologies and beginning to develop them, and beginning to look whether or not we can integrate them into an intelligent system. Companies can then invite potential clients and customers onto our site to show them off and potentially use that as a platform for selling them. Very proud of that work that we're going to be doing. We'll be supporting those communities who employ local people, who help socially sustain those local communities. So what do we need to do? My last slide. We need to enhance carbon capture and storage within the UK and globally. We need to reduce our energy use and improve the efficient use of energy consuming activities. We need to expand the numbers of low carbon sources that we have for energy generation. But we need to develop more consistent policies across the UK and across the world around energy per se. And then finally, we need to develop that science to inform the skills development and the innovation of technologies within the UK. Thank you.
Can you hear me at the back? Yes? About? You can? Just about. Just about. Is that better? No? It is better, okay. Right, good evening everybody, my name is Roy Alexander. I'm glad that Joe's presented the big global picture. I'm going to look at things a bit more locally and also present a few alternatives. That title varies a little from what's on the programme, but it's pretty much the same stuff that I'm covering. I also was misinformed. I thought this was the second anniversary. Congratulations on it being the third. Apologise for that error as well. So what I'm trying to do is address some questions for us locally. By locally I mean the UK and also the local area. How much energy will we like? How much does it cost? And I'll look at cost in a variety of ways. How much can we afford? Then consider how much we really need and where we might get it from, and then try to bring it down to the really local in terms of what we can do, particularly initiatives like the Frodsham Transition Initiative and other groups working to the same sustainable ends. So how much will we like? Well, Joe's indicated some of the rates globally. Those are global figures as well. And we can see that from that we seem to be addicted to energy. The rise in energy use has been exponential in the last 50 or 60 years. Gone up enormously. How much does that cost? So we can look at cost in a number of ways. There's cost in terms of money that you and I pay on our fuel bills. And we're all aware, I'm sure I don't need to tell you how much energy has gone up in the last 2 or 3 years. With the downward blip in the oil price, I don't imagine that's anything more than temporary, that has eased in the last few months. That's brought energy costs to us as domestic customers down by a small amount, nothing like the amount oil's dropped, of course, but I imagine that is not a long-term change, so it's likely to go up again. So energy is expensive in terms of money. Of course, it's also expensive in terms of carbon emissions. Those, that's the carbon emission record from the Mauna Loa station in Hawaii. It was published in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Fifth Assessment Report recently. And we can see there's been an inexorable rise. There's been all sorts of initiatives to reduce carbon emissions in the last couple of decades, but it's continued to go up. Now, you may have seen some headlines in the papers at the end of last week saying that for the first time, the headline there, the International Energy Agency reported that global carbon emissions had stalled last year. And the reason that was so important is it stalled before, but it's the first time carbon emissions globally have stalled when there hasn't been a major crisis like an economic recession. So maybe there's a little bit of good news there, but as the researchers producing that report say, it's encouraging, but don't get complacent about it. We're still on the upward path. So if we bring more carbon into the atmosphere, what's the cost of that in terms of changes to our climate? Well, a couple of figures here. The upper one, again, is from the IPCC report, and it's a little complicated because they produce a series of models. They model what's happening in the atmosphere, and they test those models on the past, to see if they fit past patterns. If they do, they project them forward in time to estimate what is likely to happen in the future, going up to the end of this century. And you can see there are two, they produce lots and lots of models, run them lots of times, and they run them under different scenarios. And the scenarios are better explained on the graph at the bottom. The pink lines here, that's the business as usual scenario, carry on as we are, and the best estimate for the models is that we'll have a temperature rise of something like 4 degrees by the end of the century. That sounds nice, but 4 degrees warmer here, but it would be absolutely disastrous. The last time we had a switch of those dimensions in the other direction, Frodsham was under 1 kilometre of ice. So you don't need a very big change in temperature, in global temperatures, to get significant changes in the climate. The most optimistic projections, the most optimistic projections are the blue lines here, and that's moving rapidly to a low carbon future, some of the suggestions that Joe was making, and some that I'll go on to explore a little bit further. But even so, we're still looking at a 1 degree C rise, even if we take action straight away. So the climate is going to change, that's inevitable. I don't know if you saw the programme Climate Change in Numbers on the BBC, on BBC 4 a couple of weeks ago. An interesting programme. They took 3 numbers, so climate change is all about 3 numbers, and they explored the mathematics underlying those numbers. And those numbers were, first of all, 0.8. That's 0.8 degrees Celsius. That's the known temperature increase that's happened in the last century. So global temperatures have gone up by almost 1 degree over the last century. Most of that rise was in the last 40 or 50 years. 95% is the probability that human action is a large and most important cause of the changes in temperature over that period of time. That's directly from the IPCC report last year. And then 1 trillion tonnes, that's an almost mind-boggling figure, isn't it? But that's the figure that's been calculated as the maximum amount of carbon we can put into the atmosphere without causing irreversible climate change. Now, the disturbing thing about that is, if you put more than 1 trillion, we'll go above the 2 degrees C threshold. The why 2 degrees C increase is so important is because once we get above a 2 degrees C rise in temperature, then we get into what's called positive feedback. We get changes that lead to more changes that increase it further. Drying out of tropical forests, oxidation of the soils, the plant material, up goes more carbon into the atmosphere. The drying out of large areas of peat in the northern hemisphere, methane released, and also oxidation of carbon stores there. So it's a critical figure. Now, the interesting thing about that is that, 2 interesting things. One is that we've already burnt half of that. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've already used about half of that trillion tonnes of carbon and put it into the atmosphere. And the other part is that we already have proven reserves about 2.8 trillion tonnes. So we've already got more proven reserves in the ground than we can afford to put in the atmosphere if we want to prevent runaway climate change. So I'm not sure why we need to go looking for any more. We can't burn most of what's there, and that's having a significant impact, or beginning to have, on the fossil fuel industry, in that obviously a lot of their financing is based on their proven reserves, but if they can't actually realise those reserves because it's too dangerous, then it throws their economic models. There's also suggestions recently that the impact could be more extreme than that. This is some recent work from US Department of Energy that's basically suggesting that the rate of change in temperature, global temperatures, could be greater than has previously been predicted. The grey line through the middle here is the global average. The Arctic increases most rapidly. So on this axis, rate of change, degrees Celsius per decade, this is time on the bottom axis, going up to the end of the century again. So those figures look small. So global change of about 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade doesn't sound like much, but over a century, that's 2 degrees. And much more than that in some parts of the world. Obviously, being the melting of ice and the polar ice caps. So we come back to how much energy do we need? And there's a few graphics here from a report produced by the Centre for Alternative Technology in Cllr called Zero Carbon Britain, and it's well worth a read. I don't have time to go into the details on that this evening, but some very useful material in there. This shows us the data for 2010. Energy data are usually a couple of years behind. This was published in 2013. And first of all, it shows the mix of supply on the left-hand side, and then it shows the mix that's actually delivered, and notice an awfully large bit of that at the top is losses in the system. There's quite a high percentage of losses in our energy system. And then on the right is the demand and how that demand breaks down, which is similar to the figures that Joe gave earlier in terms of the breakdown between buildings and transport. So where can we get the energy from? Well, fossil fuels is an obvious source. Joe's talked about those, but we run the risk with fossil fuels if we exceed that 1 trillion tonnes, then give or take a few 100,000 tonnes, neither here nor there, then we have the risk of runaway climate change, going above 2 degrees C global warming. Divestment, you familiar with the term divestment? Have people come across this? There's a lot of campaigns about divestment. This is there are campaigners now trying to urge investors to remove their investment from fossil fuel based companies, because there's a morality issue there, an equity issue across the globe, and not only that, there's a simple pragmatic investment issue for investment managers. If you're running a pension fund or other sorts of investments and you're putting that money into a company that has a lot of reserves, but reserves that can't be realised and used, then maybe that's not such a good bet as it was 10 years ago. So that movement is getting started. It's going to grow dramatically. Nuclear. Joe's talked about nuclear. Nuclear, as we know, is controversial. There have been a few nuclear accidents. I'm not going to play that card at all, but we've had a reasonable history with nuclear in this country. It's quite some time since there were major issues with it, or fairly recent in Japan. But of course, most of our nuclear stations currently are getting very old. They've already been decommissioned, some, the others will be decommissioned soon. And there's a very long lead time on nuclear. It takes a long time to build a nuclear power station, get it up and running. It's good for base load, for giving us a base load of energy supply, but it's not very good for switching on and off or fluctuating demand. And then, of course, a whole series of renewables, renewable options that can be developed, and Joe's referred to these already. Interesting, I noticed that the Chancellor today in his budget announced consultation on a £1 billion tidal barrage, or tidal lagoon rather, for Swansea Bay. That was in today's budget. So things are perhaps moving in that direction. Can we reduce demand? So the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. And we talk a lot about alternative supplies, but what about turning that question the other way around? What about minimising losses and reducing the demand for energy? And this is a graphic again from the Zero Carbon Britain report, where they're suggesting that we could reduce demand by 60%. Notice that the size of the slice for industry doesn't alter in that. Industry, specifically the UK obviously, industry doesn't have to reduce its energy demands. We need that for industry. But buildings and transport, we can make major changes in. We have the technology, it's not rocket science to make those changes. Can we change the mix, the fuel mix that delivers our energy? Again, I refer to this report, and they suggest that we can make considerable changes to the report, and that we can do it at zero carbon, relying largely on renewable energy, and also the conversion of surpluses. If we look at the times of surplus supply, one of the problems that's always put forward for renewables is that they are not consistent. Wave and tidally, or tidal certainly, as we can predict the tides years in advance, but wind and solar aren't, they're intermittent. But when they're producing in excess, then we can use that energy in various ways by converting it to different forms and put it into a more usable form that represents storage and also other opportunities for use. So what can we do? What can I do? Well, the first thing is to decide what it is that you want. Oops, did I just blank that? I pressed that. Is there a blanking switch on here? Which one is it? Ah, that was it. Okay, I found it again. Very, very close to the advance switch. Sorry about that. So here we go. Here's a sign from nearby. Farming, not fracking. So people in that area don't want fracking. And then 3 miles down the road, people don't want wind turbines either. So there's lots of negatives about what people don't want, but what do you want? And that's a community, it's a national decision for citizens to make. But we do have to make those choices. And just saying no to everything means the lights go off. So in terms of what we can do individually, well, we can look at our own lifestyles. We can read the literature, we can get advice, look at our own lifestyles. How can I reduce my personal energy use? How can I save energy? But then people will argue, well, you're just one person, that doesn't make much difference. So if that's a problem, then get together with other like-minded people and it begins to add up. One person maybe doesn't make much difference, 100,000, oh, that begins to count rather more. We get to significant figures. So community efforts can be useful. What sort of things can we do? Well, we can look at carbon reduction through energy reduction. So we can insulate our buildings better. Joe's already referred to that. We can use much more efficient appliances in our houses. We can change our behaviour. We can turn the thermostat down a bit. We can not leave unused lights on. We can look at the way in which we travel. We can alter our diet to less energy intensive foodstuffs and more locally grown. And the graphic there is just some of the excuse me, some of the changes that people in Ashton Hayes, which is where I live, made in the first year of our Going Carbon Neutral projects. That was back in 2007. We can move to renewable energy generation. We can try to generate our own energy, and doing that we can do it on our own houses, but better still we can get together in communities and do it, and it therefore becomes more effective. And there's an example of some of the things again that we've done in Ashton Hayes with solar PV, our low carbon sports pavilion that's heated by an air source heat pump, and also the electric car that we had for a while and ran as a community car. Community energy is growing. The past boss of RWE Power said recently that it's reached its natural end. Centralised energy has reached its natural end. At present, UK electricity is delivered by big power generation stations, and then the energy just flows away from them down to the individual end users in houses and buildings like this. But that's reaching the end of its life. The national grid is old, it's creaking, we're running out of generation capacity. Many of the nuclear stations, as I said, are reaching the end of their lifetimes. Many of our coal-fired power stations will be closing in the next few years, partly because they're old, but also because of tighter European regulations that mean we can't continue to use them. So we have to look for alternatives. And distributed low-carbon generation is the future. It's gathering momentum. A lot of that is happening at community level. There are 5,000 or more community groups around the country working on energy activities, a lot of them now looking at generation. Local authorities and the private sector are getting involved in low-carbon energy, particularly distributed heat network, district heating. I was at a conference in London yesterday that was all about this, and there's a big investment going on there. There's government support for community activities through the Community Energy Strategy, but although we welcome the Department of Energy and Climate Change having published the Community Energy Strategy last year, it still leaves quite a lot of hurdles when you actually try to do something as a community group. Won't go through these in detail, but first of all, there are regulatory hurdles. A community can generate energy, but it can't deliver it or sell it even to the people in that community because of the way the industry is regulated. And certainly can't sell it to consumers more widely. That's why the investments from the private sector are going into heat networks where it's sold directly, it's not going through a grid. They also produce some renewable electricity there too, but that's private wires, it's not going into the national grid. If they do need to dump it, they sell it all to the grid. They can't sell it any other way to householders. Technology procurement is awkward too. You need knowledge and expertise, and you don't necessarily have that within an individual small community. Network connection. If you do have renewable generation, connecting that to the network can be problematic particularly in remote areas. It can be extremely costly. Finance is a big problem too, raising the finance to get started, but there are many innovative ways to do that now through crowdsourcing, share issues, selling equity and so on. There are government incentives, but for that in terms of enterprise investment scheme and so on, but some of those are under threat at present. So the landscape isn't wonderful. What it does emphasise is the need as a community group to work with others. We need professional support. Community Energy England provides some of that. It was established in May last year. It's a not-for-profit organisation. It provides a voice for the community energy sector. And it was set up in recognition of the growth in the sector and the fact that there are already equivalent bodies in Wales and Scotland, and we needed to catch up. It's an umbrella organisation that is a voice for community energy in England. And the web address is on there. I'm sure the slides will be available. Now, there's been a lot of activity in the community space in the last couple of years. A lot of emphasis has gone into community generation, and many community groups have kind of lost sight of the reduction, the saving of energy, the energy efficiency message. And it's important not to lose sight of those. Energy efficiency, energy conservation are critically important. And although there are hurdles for generation, there are also hurdles for communities in terms of promoting and demonstrating the benefits of energy saving and energy conservation. So what do we need to do as a community? Well, first of all, establish a vision. A lot of what I've talked about is mitigation, mitigating climate change through reducing energy use and thus reducing carbon, but adaptation's equally important, resilience and adaptation, because a lot of the changes we've made to the climate already aren't going to stop. If we stop producing carbon right now, we're still going to get an increase in temperature for the next 30 years. It's like turning a supertanker. So we need to adapt our communities to deal with changes in climate. Measuring your baseline, if you go down the energy efficiency carbon saving route, measurement's really important. What's the baseline? Where am I starting from? How will I know if I'm getting better? Have a strategy, set some targets. But don't try to do everything at once. There's a whole series of things that community groups do. Some focus on food, some on travel, some on energy, some on carbon, all sorts of different approaches. Don't try and do everything at once. You'll go mad and get burnt out. Campaigning and communication is really important too. Particularly this year, of course, because we have the Conference of the Parties taking place in Paris in December. And that is an international meeting that happens every year in the autumn, has done for the last 20 or so years. It's been a bit of a damp squib for the last few years, but the parties have agreed, they've committed themselves to coming up with a binding climate agreement in December this year in Paris. So we need to put as much pressure on our politicians, our political representatives as possible to get that message through to them, to take that to the other nations at the meeting in Paris. Get help. Sorry about the acronyms, but there just wasn't room to write all these down on the slide. EST is the Energy Saving Trust. LCCN is the Low Carbon Communities Network. TI Network is the Transition Network, obviously. Lots of collaboration there. And C+WLCN is the Cheshire and Warrington Low Carbon Community Network. All around to help to share ideas and to provide advice. Look at opportunities to bulk buy. More acronyms, I'm afraid. EE means energy efficiency. So if you bulk buy insulation, that sort of thing becomes much cheaper if it's done for a whole street than if individual houses do it separately. If you want to install solar panels on your house, again, if you do it as a collective rather than individual, the prices go down. So RE is renewable energy. And seek funds from wherever you can get them. Be inventive. So is it possible? Can we make a change at a community level? Well, if we can put a probe on a comet that's thousands of miles from the Earth, and if we can build a solar plane that's now done about 4,000 or 5,000 kilometres, I think. It's just on its way from India to wherever it's going next. And I think Burma, is it Burma it's going to next? I've been following it a bit on the BBC. The challenge will be flying across the Pacific and across the Atlantic, but it'd be fantastic if it makes that journey in the next few months. If we can do those, then we can make a difference. It will bring implications, though, implications for lifestyle and the economy. And I finish with this graphic, again from Zero Carbon Britain, and the key message there is it's better to decide to make changes early rather than wait until you absolutely have to, and then the changes become more severe and unplanned. Better to have a plan and to take it forward at an early stage. Thank you.
My name is Muir Miller. I'm the managing director of a company called Peel Energy, which is it's a subsidiary of the Peel Holdings Group, which I think most people in this room will have heard of. What I'm going to do for the next 15 minutes, along with my colleague Steve, is just get a little bit down to a specific project. Both that my colleagues here have been speaking generally about the energy market. I'm very happy to end up in a debate with you at the end of the evening about that. But I think it might be relevant to just talk to you about how does an energy company implement a project, and clearly it makes sense to talk about Frodsham Wind Farm because that's the one that's very, very close to yourselves. So what I'm going to do this evening is just generally tell you a few facts about Frodsham Wind Farm. I'm then going to just move on and just say, how do you get a project once it's got planning consent to the point of building it and owning it and operating it? What needs to happen, just so you can understand what it takes to take a renewable energy project and make it work. I'm then going to just tell you about a few of the challenges in building the wind farm, so we then construct it, and then finally Steve Snowdon will just take you through the community benefit fund and that flows out of renewable projects such as this, and the sort of choices that you as a community and other local communities have. So, it's gone backwards. Right. So the Peel Group is a privately owned company. It's 80% owned by one individual and his family, John Whittaker. It is very much a leading real estate, infrastructure and investment company that covers areas from airports to ports. So I guess most people will know, and I'm not telling you anything new, that Peel will own John Lennon Airport. There's two other airports they own in the northeast and in Doncaster. The Port of Liverpool is 50% owned by Peel. They own a few other ports. So it moves from there to the energy division, to the environmental division, to media division. So Media City, where the BBC have moved into, is a development that's owned by Peel. And of course there's shopping malls like the Trafford Centre that I'm sure most people will have either endured or visited, whichever your appetite for shopping is. And then there's Peel Energy, which is we are a subsidiary of that group, and Peel Energy as a company has been going for about seven years now. So in about 2008, the company was formed. We pulled together the energy assets, and in that time we've dealt with a number of different technologies that have been referred to in the previous two discussions. So if you take onshore wind, that's probably the area where we've developed more projects than in the other technologies. So we have built, owned and operated them. We've got Frodsham Wind Farm, which I'm about to talk about. We've also developed and got planning consent for a couple of biomass plants, which are sort of 20 megawatt biomass plants. And of course, like a biomass plant, you can build a 20 megawatt biomass plant and get the same output as you can from a 60 megawatt wind farm. And so it's all about the intermittency and availability, and that's been mentioned before. But equally, you can develop heat networks from them, and you can help both local industry and local population make things like biomass plants much more thermally efficient. Tidal and hydro we've been involved with. So we worked on a very large feasibility study to look at a barrage across the Mersey. We did that with what was the North West Development Agency, who co-funded that study. We've sort of parked that because it comes back to another issue that was talked about this evening, which is the consistency of policy from the government. So the projects, large tidal projects, so are difficult to fund, and that's why there's not many gone through. And so yes, we do have the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon, but these sort of assets are built for 120 years, whereas wind farms are built for 25 years, and solar plants are probably 20 years, and biomass plants are 50-year life scales. So you need to try and sort of tailor the subsidy so that you're getting value for money as a consumer, but you're giving the developer that's trying to introduce renewable energy a fair chance to get the capital, invest it, and make a reasonable return on it. And we've been involved in that. We've also been involved with, we're developing 3 small hydro plants down the Manchester Ship Canal, because there's rivers flow in there and it's a flowing canal. So not a lot, just the 3 projects make about 2 megawatts between them, so it's not that much. And then we've also been involved with another very large project that was a clean coal power station with carbon capture and storage. Now Joe's been talking about that a lot in his presentation, and we were involved with trying to implement one of the first of these projects. Again, government policy which just forced us into a position where we just had to park it because the rules of the game just kept changing, and for a private company like us it just became just too big a risk and investment. So we've parked it, waiting until the time is right and the government have actually thought about carbon capture and storage and put the right incentives in place. So that's the sort of range of things we've done in the 7 years. So let me move to Frodsham Wind Farm, which is clearly on everybody's doorstep here. Just a few parameters about it. So Frodsham Wind Farm, which was consented about 2 years ago, has got 19 wind turbines, and each of the turbines will have a tip height of 125 metres high. Have a 25-year lifespan. There'll be a 50 megawatt installation capacity. So you know, that's a fairly big wind farm. I mean, that will be one of the largest wind farms in England, and it will certainly be the largest one in Cheshire when it's built. And it took us 3 years to get through the planning permission. So we have got planning permission now, and I'll talk in a minute about where do we go next. We expect to generate something like 112 gigawatt hours out of a wind farm in every year. Putting that into something that's more tangible for you, the wind farm will be available to generate 97% of the time. So there's a lot of myths about wind farms, and there's a lot of different views out here, and I'm happy to have that discussion with people. But 97% of the time, if that it's working and ready to go if the wind speed is right. And people will say, yeah, but the wind never blows and it doesn't have... Well, actually, the blades will be turning over 80% of the time on wind farms. And you do get different wind farms depending on what the wind speed is. So sometimes you can design... They're like aircraft blades, and so you can... aircraft propeller blades, and you can design them for low speed, medium speed, high speed. So it depends on the wind regime as to what blade you put in and what length the blade is, and clearly the tip height matters a lot. But in order to get round the site, to give you a feel for the scale of the site and what it will be, there'll be around 10 kilometres of access track that we have to put in place just to drive around the site. So people may think, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are very practical in here and run their own business and understand some of this stuff, but just getting consent is the start of the journey, really. So yeah, and you can't just sort of turn up with a big pile of money and get going the next day. It's like any investment. There's quite a lot of difficult things you've got to cross before you get to a point when you're ready to construct it. So and I'll just take you through some of those things. So the ready to construct bit is the point we call financial close. That's a bit like you've planned to build your own house and you've done everything about you want, and the bank have finally said, there's the mortgage, on you go and start building it. So what do we do in that phase? So several things I'll point out. So once we've got planning, there's a few technical things we need to do. So we need to do, for example, some ground investigation. We need to get sort of some some drills in the ground and understand what's under the ground so that we can design the foundations, and so before we order the turbines and get the civil engineering companies in there, you've got to understand what's under there. So is it a big pad, is it piles we're putting in the ground? And that in itself is a sort of expensive and probably 6-month exercise. You've then got to confirm the energy yield that this wind farm is going to actually give you, because you've got to design the right turbine for the right wind conditions. So we'll put up a Met mast up there, and Steve's actually had one up there. I think we've just taken it down, you said, Steve, haven't we? Yeah, so we've just recently taken it down. But that just sort of reconfirm what the energy yield is over a period of time, so you can understand the wind pattern, and you can design your wind turbine, and more importantly, the bank will believe you that the wind's there, and it will give you the money to build the wind farm. Then what you've also got to think about is how you're going to procure that equipment. How are you going to construct this? There's lots of construction projects that are more complex than wind turbine projects. So we're not pretending it's anything completely at the sharp end of technology. What we tend to do, and what most developers do with wind farms, is you just split the contracts into 2 bits. So you tend to have the turbine supply agreement, which is where you order your 19 turbines and the towers and the bits in the top that are called in the cells, and with the blades and the gearboxes and the generators in the top. And then you'll typically get a civil engineering contractor to do all of the balance of plant. So they'll do all the tracks, they'll do the foundations, and they'll subcontract the electrical work, and both in terms of the high voltage stuff, so that you can export the generation, the electricity that's been generated, and you can also in the low voltage electrical work, where you can actually control the wind farms, and you can put them on sort of remote what's known as SCADA control systems, so you can actually see them working, and you can remotely switch them on and off and fault find on them. So that's the 2 contracts you have to place. You have to make sure the design's done. You have to go out and get tenders for it in a similar manner to many of you gentlemen and ladies in here in your workplace, and then you have to look at those tenders, and you have to negotiate them, and you have to then get them to a point that you're happy with. But
turn the sound up, please.
Yes, sure. Sorry, I'll just. Shall I just stand? Why don't I just? Why don't I just do that? Is that better?
Hold on. To the microphone, it'll be even better.
Right. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I apologise if you can't hear me. So what I've just said is that you need to. You've got your balance of plant contract, and you've got your wind, and you've got your turbine supply contract, and you've got to work out, tender these, make sure you get value for money, and then, but more importantly, what you've got to think about is how do you fund this? So a wind farm such as Frodsham will cost about 70. It's going to cost us about £70 million to build. Now, clearly, you wouldn't normally do that with all of the company's money. You'd go to the bank, and you'd try and borrow the money from the bank, and you'd try and get a sort of as much debt as you could, and put your own equity in there, and you try and get that balance right. And in going to the bank, that in itself is quite a challenge, because they want to know all about what you've done. They want to make sure that the contracts you're placing are okay. They want to make sure that the risk's not. What is the risk of them not getting their money back? That's sort of the bottom line with them. And they will offer you a term sheet. They will say to you, here's how you're lending the money, here's the terms we get. But more importantly, what they'll say is they'll undertake something called due diligence, which most people in here will have heard of or know very well. But they will just look at all the documents you've prepared to procure it, to do the design work, all the technical and the financial documents, and they'll look through those in detail, and they'll appoint a third party to look through those and make sure that there's no risk in there of something going wrong with your wind farm. So while it's quite an onerous thing to do, it's a very good check for yourself to make sure you've done things properly, and that somebody that's going to lend you money is going to make sure that the risk profile is right in your wind farm. So and getting the bank across the line and to give you that money is really this kind of end point you're trying to get to. There's another point. There's 2 other points that I would mention in getting to that final financial close point. One is you've got to think about who you're selling the power to. So we have these things called power purchasing agreements, which is just like, who are we going to sell the electricity to? Now, you could say that we're extremely lucky as renewable developers, because it's a bit like building a Mars bar factory and making Mars bars and guaranteeing that you'll always have a queue outside for 25 years to buy your Mars bars, and the faster you make them, the more you can sell. Because you sell the energy for 10 to 15 years ahead, so you pre-sell it to there's a number of companies, and some of the larger companies that you'll buy your electricity from will buy the electricity from you, and you can make a sort of 10 or a 15-year contract with them. And the reason you do that is because the bank are going to lend you the money for 10 or 15 years, and they want to make sure that somebody's going to buy that for 10 or 15 years so they can get their debt and their interest back. And so that's why you do it. There's other ways to do it. Once the debt is paid off in wind farms, you can do things differently. You can supply people directly. So if there was a local business, around here, if right beside the wind farm, you could put a direct line to it and sell the electricity cheaply, because on average, a third of the cost of the electricity is in the systems, the network, the transmission and the distribution systems that were referred to earlier. So you could supply it directly and make a significant saving. You could also do what's known as sleeving it, which is simply saying that a company maybe down in Southampton could agree to buy power directly from us, and we could sell it directly to them, and that allows them to say, I am buying renewable power from that company. So because a lot of people want to demonstrate that they're moving towards a sustainable company and they're trying to buy renewable power. So that's another option. But it depends upon your bank and whether they allow you to do that, or they say you're not doing any of that, you're having a 15-year contract with one person. So that's some of the things you've got to do to get to this point, and to get to financial close. So we're now we're moving towards that point now. There's a lot of activity going on in all of those things, and we're hoping that, like, in the next 2 to 3 months we'll reach that point. At that point, when the bank's satisfied, you've placed all those contracts, you've sold the electricity, you've done the design, you've placed the contracts, you can then financially close and you can start construction. And you can virtually do it the next day. So, let's move on from the financial close point to building the wind farm. And I won't spend too much time on it, because we obviously have, like any construction project, you've got a detailed program, you've got sort of 400 line items of who's going to do what and when are they going to do it and what's the critical path item. Because some of those contracts are big contracts. To buy these turbines, you're talking like sort of probably £35 million contract. So you've got to make sure that things go right and you're ready to receive the turbines, and that you're not holding anybody up. So there will be, Steve is planning on doing a bit more of a bespoke sort of briefing to the parish and town council members in the next few weeks, and we're going to get sort of the civil engineering contractor to come and talk to people about the programme and the details. So I'm not going to go through that sort of thing this evening. There's opportunity for people to understand that. We want to make sure people understand what is going to happen on your back door here. We want to be open and say, that's when we're going to build it, this is how we're going to build it. And we're going to try really hard to make sure that there's opportunity for people locally to get involved in those contracts. So the wind farm has got a bit of a deadline on it, so we can't just take the time we want. We absolutely have to build it by the end of March 2017. And the reason for that goes back to government policies. The government's changed the policy in terms of the way it manages the energy market. For renewable projects today can get some subsidy, which everybody's heard about, and they're called renewable obligation certificates. So for every megawatt of power you produce, you get one of these subsidy certificates, and it's worth an amount of money. So you get your project subsidised, because they wouldn't survive unless there was some subsidy. That level of subsidy is coming down and down and down, because as the product life cycle as you go through the product life cycle and things like wind turbines become more mature, then the cost of producing them and the knowledge and the efficiency improves all the time. And so we have, but that subsidy system ends in 2017, in March 2017, and we've got to have the wind farm up and running by that point, because the energy system changes to something called the energy market reform. And that's not a subject for tonight. I'm happy to talk to somebody about that if they want to know what it's changed to. But what the government are trying to do is change the system into, and trying to make sure it continues to drive getting value for money for us all as consumers. So some of the things we're going to do over the next few weeks is, we've already started to store aggregate on the site. We're storing a lot of aggregate on the site because when we start the construction project, we just need to make sure we've got enough aggregate to get the paths and the foundations down, because it would be difficult to find that volume. So we're storing some on site. Yeah, we're in the process of sort of looking at some of the existing access tracks, and we're widening them, and we're going to be building out the access tracks between sort of April and August of this year. The site compound is just beginning to get established in the next few weeks for the civil contractor. And then we're going to get into the turbine foundations, and we'll be building the turbine foundations, the 19 turbine foundations, between sort of April and September of this year. And equally, we'll be building a substation for the electrical power to go out, because we'll have 2 substations on this site, because there's 2 clusters, and we'll export the power in 2 different places. The turbine manufacture will start very soon. Manufacturing the turbines goes through this year, April to October, but the turbines will actually scheduled to be brought on site and put up next January through to June of next year. Now, we're not going to be constructing right up to March of 2017. We're going to try and finish it a few months before that, simply because it comes back to that word, the lending bank again. They want to make sure that we're not going to be building up to the day before the subsidy ends, so they're going to make sure we've got a few months in there to as a buffer. So they want to see a programme that gives allows for a bit of slippage and things going wrong, so you don't end up in that position where you're up against that March date. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a feel of what we're trying to do. I'll just pass you over to Steve now, and he'll just talk to you about the Community Benefit Fund, what we're trying to do, and how we're trying to engage people to think about how we use it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm acutely aware of time, slightly behind schedule, so I'll try and get through this as quickly as I can. Can everyone hear me? No. No? Excellent. Okay, sorry, not used to the microphones and what have you. On the screen in front of you is a quote from government guidance, where the government, I think in this case it was the esteemed Mr. Ed Davey, feels that local communities should be grateful for the opportunity that wind farm developments bring to them. Now, whether or not you believe that, I'm not here to debate the rights and wrongs of that, but one of the methods that the government is pushing forward is the incentivization to communities to actually try and be more accepting of renewable energy schemes such as wind farms, but it's not limited to just wind farms. And one of the incentives is a community benefit fund. This is a voluntary contribution that the developer makes. It's not required by statute yet, although we may see some more tinkering in that regard. We'll have to keep our eyes out. So it's a voluntary contribution by the developer, and the amount that the developers are required to actually provide has steadily increased. They started to become the norm from around about 2007, in England anyway, when the amount was around about £1,000 per megawatt, and the most recent guidance issued just last year has pushed that up to £5,000 per megawatt. Peel has always committed in relation to the Frodsham wind farm to have a community benefit fund. There will be one. I can guarantee you that. So whether or not the incentivization is working is a debate that needs to be had. But in the case of Frodsham, the debate I think will be more about sort of what is the fund going to do rather than will there be one. Hopefully this is a street scene that some of you will recognise. It's actually the Frodsham market, so I thought that would try and keep it sort of local, as it were. I've got some points up there that hopefully you'll be able to read. I'm colourblind, so I do apologise if they're difficult to see. I'm told by my graphic designer they should be legible. I have to believe her. But anyway, the key point is that the Community Benefit Fund money only becomes available when the wind farm is actually commissioned, i.e. when that starts to generate. It doesn't appear before the wind farm, as it were. The Community Benefit Fund for Frodsham will be in excess of £2,000 per installed megawatt. As Muir's already said, the minimum that this wind farm has to be is 50 megawatts, and that's required by the planning condition. So the Community Benefit Fund will be in excess of £100,000 each year for 25 years. And I'll shortly be refining that number and giving you a definitive number. That money is linked to the installed capacity of the wind farm, i.e. the fixed number of megawatts that we put in, rather than, in other methods, the amount of electricity it actually generates. Because as you've heard already, the amount of electricity generated from a fuel source like wind fluctuates year on year. So when it comes to your fund, if you're tied to generation, you may have good years, you may have bad years, and that can make it difficult if you're trying to get a particular community project over the line that relies on a stable source of funding. So it's been our experience that communities prefer to know what they're going to get each year, every year, irrespective of whether it's a particularly windy year or not. And so in the case of Frodsham, it's going to be linked to the actual installed capacity of the wind farm. An important point I think to make is that the Community Benefit Fund will persist even if, and it's an if at the moment, the wind farm is subsequently sold. It will be made a condition of sale. So if Peel did at some future point choose to dispose of part or all of the wind farm to another company, the provision of that Community Benefit Fund would remain. So it won't disappear if it's sold. I think that's important. But there are a number of issues that come with a Community Benefit Fund that you as a community are going to have to grapple with. And I say, I'm bandying around this term, the community. When it comes to an infrastructure project the size of Frodsham Wind Farm, it's not as easy to sort of envisage what the immediately affected community is. And I know because I've been wrestling with this issue on and off with various members since about 2010, and they've been grappling with it as well. It's probably best illustrated on this slide here. Hopefully you can make out where the turbines are on this plan, and you can see what I've done is I've actually illustrated some of the parish councils and their respective boundaries that have previously expressed an interest in being involved in the Community Benefit Fund discussion. I think there are 9 of them at present. And actually defining the community is a heck of a challenge, because as I've been speaking to individual parishes, as you can imagine, they've each been very keen to put forward their particular case, why their particular parish is the most deserving one. And I think geographically you can look at that, and to me anyway, obviously I'm not here to play favourites, but I think some parishes will have a bigger challenge ahead of them to explain why they are deserving of receiving funds than perhaps some others. And I think you can see perhaps, without naming names, perhaps some of the outlying parishes are going to have a bigger job of work to explain why they should be able to benefit from the fund and be considered as part of the affected community more than some of the inner parishes. And that's something that we collectively, Peel and those parishes and the people in them, are going to have to work on. As a community, you need to think about your long and your short-term aspirations. What can this fund of money be best directed towards? I was pleased to hear Mr. Warren say that Frodsham's developed a long-term vision, something that it wants to achieve, and that I think is an excellent starting point. If you've got an idea of where you want to be in a set period, you can marry that to funds like this, which are going to be around for 25 years, and see if you can leverage some of that money and perhaps get it through other grant funding and organisations to match that funding to actually help you deliver on what your vision is. But if you have no idea what your priorities should be, or if they're different in each and every single parish, and I'm trying to draw them all together, it becomes very difficult. And I would suggest it becomes harder to actually deliver something more concrete that is of definite value to the community than if you have a solid target to aim at. So I think that's something that we're going to certainly be trying to develop and discuss with you about what you think the fund should be targeted at. With that fund comes an obligation on you to put in place a proper governance structure, because this is a multi-million-pound fund and it will need to be administered properly, and you need to decide who you want to do that. There are third-party companies out there that will happily take a slice of the fund for the privilege of administering it on your behalf. If you're not happy with that, you can actually develop your own governance structure. And I think in an area like Frodsham and Helsby and that, there ought to be enough educated and committed people quite capable of stepping up to that challenge and saying, we will administer the fund on behalf of this community, however that may be defined. Other wind farms in other areas, in Scotland in particular, the council actually steps in and says, no, we know best, we'll deliver it on your behalf. Now, when I first asked this question back in 2010, one of the few things that everybody agreed on was that they didn't want the council with a capital C to take charge of this fund on their behalf. I think they were worried that the benefits may become too diffuse, go to areas that weren't immediately affected, and that's fine. But we do need to work with the council officers because they are involved in assisting you in things like your neighbourhood plans, which may be a good place to start as well. So yes, you're getting a community benefit fund. It will be significant, but it brings with it certain challenges. And I think that's where I'd like to sort of leave that really, is to leave that point with you, to have a think. Yes, there's going to be a wind farm built. You will get a community benefit fund. How best can you make that work for you? So I'd sort of like to leave you with that question, if I may. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Andrew Dawson, one of your Cheshire West and Chester councillors, and Lynn Riley, my colleague, is also here in the audience. First, on your behalf, can I just say thank you to Frodsham Transitions Initiative. Thank you. It's a marvellous evening. Great to hear you. Thanks also to all of our speakers. They were all challenging in lots of different ways, some more than others. I've had an interesting relationship with Peel over the last 3 or 4 years. Sometimes I praise them. Most of the time I give them a good kicking. Tonight I'm probably going to give them more of a kicking, primarily because they didn't talk to me before what they were going to say. And the good advantage of talking without notes is I can now respond because I've got no planned remarks. The Community Benefit Fund, for example, is very, very important to all of us, and it is essential, I believe, that we have a complete community consultation, not just Frodsham, Helsby and the surrounding communities as well, so everybody gets an opportunity to have their say what they want doing with this money. Now, from my point of view, I think there are 2 main questions to ask in relation to it. One is, do we want to have one large project? And we all know the aspirations for a community swimming pool, for example, and the obvious place for it would be at Helsby High School. Or do we want to do it with something else? And it's not for me to tell you what you want, but I do think it's for the community to tell Peel and everybody else how they would like that fund spending. I don't like the idea of the fund being dissipated in small pockets here, there and everywhere, and money being lost in the administration. I do like the idea of saying perhaps we should have something which we will have an enduring benefit for, but it's not my decision. I want to make sure it's your decision. One of the other issues that came out tonight, and I have criticised Peel roundly for this, and I will criticise them again roundly for it now, is when they talked about the particular scheme, they talked about what they were going to do. They didn't talk about how they are going to be our good neighbour. And they're going to be with us for at least 25 years with this wind farm. And if you want to keep me in the post that I'm in, I will keep their feet to the fire and try to make sure they are our good neighbour. You see, they can get it right. One of our concerns relates to the biomass plants. These are incinerators. Peel have got consent for 2 of them down at Ince. We are all concerned about air quality. One of the things that Peel got so right was when Lynn and I and others went to them and said, we need to be advised independently of you, independently of government, independently of regulators, as to whether or not we're going to be affected by this. They had the good grace to come up with the money. And we had an independent air quality report, and you'll be glad to know the independent air quality report has said we do have a slight problem in Frodsham. It's not industry related, it's traffic related, And the chronic point for the traffic-related fumes is the bottom of this road at Fluin Lane. Ironically, the pedestrian crossing in stationary traffic is probably causing a problem. Our nitrogen oxide levels there are higher than the EU action levels, so it is something we're going to have to deal with. Now, the good news is, if you go to the Manor House Primary School, there you will see in the car park a large container. In that container is air quality monitoring equipment that Lynn and I and Frodsham Town Council, and with help from Peel, put there so that we are monitoring the air quality here in advance of anything happening down at Ince. We asked INEOS to join with us, because of course they're burning Greater Manchester's waste up the road there. We asked INEOS to join with us to help fund it. They said no. Now, the good news is, of course, I get opportunities like this to tell you exactly what I've been trying to do. So INEOS, in this regard, are very bad boys indeed, and I will continue to say it. But I do praise Peel for helping us go on that independent journey. Now, one of the things we haven't heard tonight is the F word, the fracking word. Peel have got 4 projects pretty much on the go around here. The wind farm, they've got Ince Resource Recovery Park, they've got the solar farm, which is planned for next to the M56 junction with the motorway. As was described to me by somebody else, the least offensive of the projects they're planning for us. But they've also looking now to look at fracking. Now, that's fine. They are quite entitled to look at all these things. But I think we've got a problem with our planning system. And the problem with the planning system is it doesn't matter whether it's INEOS's incinerator or the Peel incinerators down the road at Ince or the wind farm, all of those schemes went in without our community consent. And in fact, in most of those cases, it went in the teeth of our opposition. Now, if all of you agree with me, there is something I would love you all to do tonight. Please either write me a letter, send me an email, or just drop it in my house, 45 Fluin Lane here, and give me what you want us to do with regard to our local planning policies. Lynn and I spoke to a committee at Cheshire West which is looking at what planning policies we need to look at unconventional oil and gas extraction. And what we said was, the community has got to come front and centre. There has to be community consent. And it doesn't matter how you draft the law or the planning policy, I want the community to have the effective veto for anything that goes on. I don't want to be in a situation of saying, we fought the good fight, guys, we all didn't want this to happen, and it's still being forced upon us. I think those days are over. And I also want to get to a situation, because we will have community benefit funds with the Ince Resource Recovery Park, with the solar farm, and God forbid if we get fracking too. I want us all to join the dots together and say, do you know what, we may not like this, and if it does happen to us, we all individually need to make that cost-benefit analysis and go, do you know what, it either is or it isn't worth it. And I want you guys to have the decisive say. I mean, I can rabble-rouse, I can lead, whatever you want me to do, but at the end of the day, it's not for me to say, or any councillor, or indeed any planning officer, to say what we as a community will live with. It's for us and our children and our grandchildren that we will need to make these decisions. And it's not just Peel, because bless them, Peel at least are having a bit of a dialogue with me. I am also going to go after the tail of INEOS, because I think it is simply unacceptable that they are not in proper dialogue with us about their plans. You may have seen on the news very recently, they've taken a big stake in iGas. iGas are the people who have got the licenses to exploit for shale gas in our area. Now, we want the jobs. We want our petrochemical industry to be successful, I'm sure. We want the products that come from it. But I want a transformed relationship with industry around this estuary. I no longer want them to be what's on our skyline. I want them to be our good neighbour. I want them to be joining with us, helping us solve our problems, and in particular, dealing with the problems that they may be causing us. I've had far too many people come up to me and say, well, they're worried about air quality in Frodsham. The irony is, I can say, yes, we're doing work on it, and please bear in mind at the moment at least, the problems are your own cars and your own transport. But if any of you want to get involved in these exercises, please also let me know, because the great thing we did about the Air Quality Forum was, it wasn't just councillors, it was the people in the community who came forward. So we asked anybody in the community, who's got an expertise in understanding air quality? And so we got professors of this, regulators from the HSE and other people sitting around the table who knew what they were talking about. And I want us collectively as a community to get that skill and knowledge together. As Lynn and others say, we have got a very intelligent, articulate community around this estuary. Let us all use those skills and expertise, because collectively we can hold all this big industry, we can hold their feet to the fire. And there's many things in Frodsham that we lead locally and nationally in what we do. I want us to lead in transforming that relationship with these big industry players. They, as far as I'm concerned, must know, yes, we welcome you, we welcome your jobs, we welcome your products, it's important for UK PLC. But it is no longer acceptable to do things to us without our consent. You must work with us, you must help us understand, and if it means funding independent of advice so that we feel confident that what you're doing stacks up, then so be it. I'm delighted that the professors are here tonight. We can have confidence, I'm sure, in what they say. I happen to be a regulatory lawyer. I defend the indefensible in my walk of life. But I know how the Environment Agency and the HSE are not well regarded by the public. And it's also a shame that our regulators aren't good enough. They don't get public engagement. And I'm going to put on my website tonight the clips of Lynn and I talking at the committee just in February. And you will hear us both say the same thing. Both of us are committed to putting the community first and foremost. The decisions are ours to take, and I will do my damnedest to put you first. So guys, if you've got something to say about whether or not you want to have the definitive say about large controversial developments on our estuary, would you please write to Cheshire West and Chester Council and say it? You can find their email address easily. If it's easier for you, a scribbled piece of paper, "Dear Andrew, you're damn right, love and hugs Fred," or whatever your name is, stick it through my door at 45 Fluin Lane, and I will make damn sure that message is communicated. Because it's a crying shame for me, as far as I know, there have only been 3 councillors at Cheshire West and Chester who have actually put their heads above the parapet and said how they want their communities to go forward with these sorts of schemes. And whether you like us or not, 2 of those 3 are Frodsham councillors. Thank you for your time.
Well, quite interesting that really, as I was so busy concentrating that I forgot that I was standing up next. Now it's the time for yourselves. Lots of things have been spoken about this evening. Would you like to pose questions to people here? And we can try and get you some answers tonight. Anybody got a living question?
My name's Joe Beswick. Some of you remember that I attended all the days at the meeting at the hotel, Sutton Weaver, and I gave an impassioned speech about my regard for the marsh. I don't know whether you realise, but nothing's been mentioned about what's going on the marsh at the moment, and if this is relative. The far end where the Helsby site is going, part of it is about 230 acres of virgin, what you might call habitat. Now at the meeting at the hotel, this came up quite often, and we had some assurance that this would be looked after. But I can assure you that this 230 acres is in the process of being decimated. There's been hundreds of trees and bushes ripped out, and I don't know how they're allowed to do it under the Countryside Act at the moment. Then again, we were told they'd never lost an appeal, so it's a shame. Not only that, the roads on the marsh, for whatever reason, I suppose it's because they're going to be widened, all the trees along these roads have been hacked off. If I regard the marsh as an animal, I would say that it's mortally wounded. Thank you.
Mr. Powell. I was just wondering if Peel had proposals for a share issue to the community.
The straight answer is we weren't proposing a share issue for part of the wind farm on this project. Sort of the subject of share issues and trying to get community involvement, you're absolutely right, is coming in more and more as newer wind farms come through. We have one wind farm in Scotland where we are trying to talk with, we are talking with the local community, and we're saying to them, you know, would you like a community benefit fund, or would you like to sort of end up having a share of a share of the wind farm? And it's quite an involved conversation, because people have to make up their minds, the community have to make up their minds whether they want some sort of annual fund to help them with things that are important to the community, or the share in the wind farm tends to be a bit of a much longer term investment. So as it happens on this wind farm up in Scotland, the community have said, yeah, look, we want to invest in the wind farm for our children and our grandchildren. So they will own around about half a turbine. I know obviously you can't sort of say it's half a turbine, but they will have a share. And just like everybody else that's got a share, they're going to have to, you know, borrow part of their share. It comes from the bank, and part of the share comes from their community, the money that we donate into the community. And it could take sort of 8 or 9 years before they own that share. They paid back the sort of debt part of that share, and they own that. Then they own that half a turbine, and then they'll get the income that comes off that on an annual basis. And they've taken the view that that's what they want to do, because they can then see there's a 20-year income fund that's more than that would leverage up a bit more than just the annual share, and they would use that to help with education in the area and helping people that can't afford to send their children to further education to do that. So that's just an example of what we're doing. We haven't done it with this wind farm, because really what we've done is, at the time when we were taking this wind farm through, the community benefit fund was what was asked of us for the government, and what you're referring to is a good idea, and it is being brought in more and more.
Would people like that?
Yeah.
No.
Is the share issue something that would, like, you know, be followed up and, you know, not necessarily completed this evening, but some sort of information provided? Would that be of help to a lot of people? I can see a few nodding heads. Maybe we can follow that up at some later stage.
I've said that on this wind farm right now, it is not part of something we're offering. You get really mixed views when you do have that discussion with people about it. That's one way to do it. There is another wind farm where we're actually saying to people they can potentially invest in part of it, separate to the community fund. They can personally invest in it, but you have to put down some fairly strict rules, because, you know, otherwise you just get a few rich people that live 50 miles away and just want to sort of own a chunk of the wind farm, and it's not really of any community benefit. So it's a fairly topical conversation you end up having, because you get very mixed views about should you invest or not, and where do people live, and how much you should be allowed to put in depending on people's circumstances.
Can we take a follow-up question?
Yes, as we are the area making the sacrifice to sell this power around the nation, I've never understood why we won't gain by a reduction in our fuel bills. That would benefit everybody, wealthy or not, and it would be some recompense for the price we're paying in our neighbourhood.
Do you want me to do that, or do you want to? Yeah, so that I'm not.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just.
I don't know the details of any particular case, but I am aware that it's rather more complicated than that, in that the problem is that the power is generated at one point and goes into the grid, and then people buy back from the grid. One of the biggest hurdles we've got, as I mentioned in my talk, is actually distributing energy locally, and the system just isn't set up. That's a battle that's happening, but it's a longer battle that we have to fight to get the regulations changed.
I'm talking about
Ah, okay, but in that case...
Reduction in our fuel bills.
I know you are, yeah, but that would have to be a financial transaction then, which would involve Peel possibly at doing that instead of the Community Benefit Fund, but then they're having to deal with how many suppliers of energy are there here. The contractual, the amount of money that would be lost in administration would be enormous, I would suggest. I don't know, I'm just trying to envisage how it might work.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair comment. From an the electrons we produce, would never be able to direct supply sort of individual people. It's clearly something that you feel find you'd like to discuss, but I think we're right. Is it a community benefit fund you want, or do we start getting into trying to administer a small reduction for everybody, and how do you do that? I don't know. I think it's better to say, if you feel you are getting disadvantaged by the wind farm coming, then the community benefit fund is the way that we're trying to sort of feed back into the community, and we haven't to date. I don't know any wind farm that's just given a reduction to people on their electricity bills, because I think it would probably be. I think the point about administration is probably the one that would water the benefit down.
Any more questions?
What about the noise pollution we get from these turbines?
Yeah. Sorry, was your question about
Noise.
right? And what would you like to know about noise?
Well, they create quite a sound, don't they, these turbines?
Yes, they do, and we have as part of the planning application, we have got we do, as part of our environmental impact assessment, we get professional third-party companies to do noise studies and demonstrate that does the noise impact people, or does it not impact local people? I mean, it's not sort of noise plus noise makes 2 times the noise, as you well know, because you've got the M56 that's between you and the wind turbines, and so there's an element of very high base noise coming from the M56 in your community.
Well, we've just had that reduced because they put the surface down.
Right.
That reduces the noise.
Right. Well, I'm pleased then. That's very helpful. But the study that we did and the study that we demonstrated to the planning authorities, it's there and it's still available for you to read. I assure you, we are not impacting the community against any of the regulator's standards.
That doesn't, I'm afraid, answer the question. You are saying the study is being done and it says the regulators are not impacted. Sorry,
no.
But in fact I think the noise level will increase. And they've done a very good job to get the motorway level down.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
When the Secretary of State granted planning permission for this one, there is actually a series of specific conditions stipulating the maximum noise levels that this wind farm will be allowed to go up to, and the procedures that actually have to be followed out should any of those daytime or nighttime noise levels be breached, and they're part of the actual planning consent. So what we have to ensure when we select these turbines is that they perform better than the standards that we have to adhere to make certain that we do not breach them. In the event of a breach or a valid complaint being made, for example, should you choose to do so, to complain to the council, there is a set procedure that will then kick off, and we will actually have to go out and do another assessment as to whether or not we are actually adhering to those noise levels, and if not, we have to reduce them so we actually meet our statutory requirements in that regard. So there is built into the planning system, as it were, a series of enforcement checks that are there ostensibly to protect you in the event that there is an exceedance of those particular noise levels. We have to get it back down, and that can be by, for example, if I take an extreme case, limiting the times that that particular turbine that causes the breach may be able to operate at particular wind speeds. So there is a corrective mechanism, as it were. But at this stage, because obviously they're not built, I think it's a bit too early to say they are definitely going to cause me a problem.
My name's Nikki Barker. I'm a brown owl down the road here, but I've spent 20 years working in the energy industry. And I'd like to ask the university, what can you put in place to help raise awareness of actually how the energy system works? Because you've spoken today about the issues of transmission networks and energy when it's produced actually going into the transmission network, and actually not enough people understand how the energy system works. So arguments are put forward that there aren't answers to currently, because people don't know that they can't put energy, we can't store it in a very good way currently. So when the wind blows, you've got to use it or you lose it. And actually, the education isn't there. So given that we've now got the university and the Energy Institute actually on our doorstep, how are you going to help raise that awareness and hopefully the understanding of what distributed networks might actually bring to a local community, and how the local community would go about actually looking at developing things like that? So I'm moving away from Peel. I think you've had enough for a little while.
Kind of you to give them a rest. Is that one?
No, it's nice.
That's better. Kind of you to give them a rest. We do that in a variety of ways. Obviously, we're a university, so we run undergraduate and postgraduate courses, some of which cover this sort of territory. We also run public lectures series, and a number of us go out. Obviously, we have a limited number of specialists in a wide range of areas, but we go out and do speaking public fora such as this. I mean, personally, this is about my 75th in the last 5 years. So we do our best to get the message out through a variety of fora. That will only be increasing with the development of the Energy Institute up at Thornton, and Joe can tell you more about the plans they have, particularly for public events and public awareness raising.
Yes, I'm very proud to be the professor of the Thornton Energy Institute. I've been in post for now 6 months. As your colleagues are here may well be aware, the university has recently embarked upon a significant investment to open up an engineering faculty on the Thorn former Shell Technology site, now called the Thornton Science Park. We'll be delivering a number of undergraduate and postgraduate programs there, CPD programs. We'll also be doing some significant work through European Regional Development funding, opportunities to work closely with local small to medium-sized enterprises. Personally, I do, like Alex, I do a number of these particular events. I've done 5 in the last 5 weeks, so there's opportunities for us to get out into the community. I'm also a STEM ambassador, so often I go to local schools, or in my previous role I went into local schools. I've not gone into any yet within the Cheshire community. However, it is something that as a university we're committed to. I said this previously, we're committed to generating the science to inform public policy and debate, and it's something I'm very passionate about. And I think it's something that we will be playing a key role in moving forward. Remember, the Thornton Science Park was only taken over earlier in the year by the university. It's a significant departure into science and engineering for the university. So I rather hope that over the course of the next 4 to 5 years, you'll see more and more of us. Peel.
Just one comment from me would be, I would be very happy to talk to you after this, and if you think it was of any help, I'd be happy to let you and your Brownie group or whatever youth group wishes to go on a tour of a wind farm. We do that quite regularly, and we take youth groups and primary schools and university students around wind farms to try and help with a programme of education. So if that's something that's of interest to you, I'm happy to give you that offer.
just one opportunity for me to blatantly advertise as well as you raise the issue. There's an MSc programme in sustainability that we run at the university. Your brownies are probably a bit young, but feel free. I'll leave a few of these brochures on the front. Feel free. It covers just these very issues. We have a section on energy in that.
Just thinking, and I don't know if anyone in the community would be interested in this, but how about the community benefit fund being used by the community to create their own energy? And would we get support from Cllr and the university if people and the community agreed to this and wanted to try and do this project?
I think that's an excellent idea. It's exactly what I wrote down when Stephen was speaking. It'll require a lot of work, but why not? The fund comes from renewable energy, so why not revolve it, to use yet another metaphor, mixed metaphor or pun from the wind turbines, and use it to generate more. Excellent idea.
How do we go about doing that?
Um,
You know, how do we sort of put in a bid for doing that for people who are interested?
Sorry, let Steve go there. Sorry, hi, can you hear me? Yeah, a lot depends really. If you decide that that is the big project that you wish to back, then it may be, as Councillor Dawson said, if that is what the community wishes to actually deliver, i.e. its own community energy generation project, then I would have thought that there would be no need to actually bid for it. That would be the project to which the CBF would be directed. What you may need to consider is whether or not you put every single pound of that CBF towards it, or whether you hold back a small portion for perhaps shorter term projects that may wish to come forward, that you may then deliver via a small term grant system. So I think that there's no obstacle to that. You could shape the governance around that. The challenge, I think, would be working with your neighbours, because it's obviously not just Frodsham, as hopefully the plan I provided earlier indicates, and seeing whether they are of the same mind. I suspect consensus building, as in many walks of life, will prove one of your biggest challenges in that regard.
Quick question back to Peel. Is the 100,000 a flat amount per year, and if so, what's that worth in 25 years' time?
Is that okay? The £100,000 is actually the minimum that it will be. It's not a fixed amount. Yet Peel committed to providing more than £2,000 per megawatt. I chose that figure for purpose of illustration. It would be a flat amount, but it would be index linked to make certain that it will retain its value, rather than, as you suggest, tailing off to the point where in 2042 it really doesn't amount to a great deal at all.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions before we sort of break out into small groups?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Daniel Coleman. I work with Frodsham Bike Project. I live in the Marsh Lane area of Frodsham, and my current and most frequent cycle route is the marsh trails between Frodsham, Helsby and Elton and Ince. I've noticed since the increase of traffic and heavy vehicles through the marsh trails that the road surface has become extremely pitted and bumpy due to the higher traffic from all the vehicles, that the cutting down of the hedges and the storage of the gravel I've noticed down there. I know Frodsham Council have been talking about upgrading the surfaces and stuff of the local cycle routes. Shouldn't Peel be held accountable for the damage that they've made to the surface? Because at the moment it's becoming quickly an unrideable cycle route.
Yes, we will be restoring the roads to the position they're in. I mean, we've only just started on site here, so I would make that point. Like in the last week to 10 days almost we have. So there's not, if there has been an increase in traffic, it's not because of the projects that we've been talking about tonight, but we do recognise there will be an increase in traffic, and we do recognise that we may damage these pathways, and we have an obligation to make sure that they are restored properly.
Past fortnight, I've noticed that the road surface is already becoming quickly damaged.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to know what time frame have Peel got in mind for restoring this cycle route, as it is already becoming damaged in just a short period of time that they've been sending vehicles down there.
We have established a local liaison committee where issues exactly like the one that you're raising are talked through, and I would suggest that's something I'll be getting straight onto Cheetham Hill construction about. I can't commit to a time frame right now because I'll need to talk to Cheetham Hill tomorrow morning. So what we can't get into is obviously some of the plant and equipment that's using those roads is a lot heavier than perhaps they've been accustomed to in the past. But as my MD said, we are committed to ensuring that they remain passable for vehicles and bicycles as well. And in fact, I have to say that the cycling forum and cycling sort of interest groups were among the first to approach Peel to see whether or not, because we are moving so much aggregate around, there is an opportunity outside of the CBF to actually do a lot of pothole filling. We have the material on site, we have the equipment to move it, and that's something I'm already discussing, for example, with Mr. Mark Warren of Frodsham Town Council. So I'm not deaf to your complaint at all, I would assure you. As a cyclist myself, I take an interest in that. But that is something I can't give you a definitive answer right now, but I'll get you one.
One of the issues to do with renewable energy production is the issue of energy storage for use for intermittent supplies. Now, we've got the Thornton Institute pursuing carbon capture and storage, which is obviously using fossil fuels and storing the carbon out of the atmosphere. But I was wondering if there are any comments being made or could be made about the developments of energy storage and whether the Thornton Institute is actually engaged in that field of work, and in whether there are actually developments elsewhere in the UK which is actually developing that so necessary technology.
Really good question, and I agree totally. The energy demonstrator that we will be having on site will have at its core energy storage through the notion of compressed air and compressed air energy technologies. For those of you that don't know the Thornton Science Park at the moment, it's built on, or the energy for that particular park comes from steam generation that comes off from Stanlow. What we want to do is to capture some of that energy, store it, and then ultimately transmit it back into the national grid to see whether or not we can capture different forms of energy generation. At the moment it's purely steam that's on site, but as I mentioned earlier, the energy demonstrator will be taking other technologies, innovative technologies, and bolting them on around that particular building with a view of generating energy, trying to store some of that energy and then release that energy back into the national grid. Energy storage is a major issue at the moment in terms of opportunities and possibilities for innovative technology development. So yes, we'll be doing quite a lot of that.
Could I just ask Peel? The construction of the wind farm will involve movement a lot of material. Is there any provision within your plans for keeping that off the roads and using, for instance, the ship canal? And I imagine there's going to be some very long loads with the turbine components that would be difficult through Frodsham and Helsby.
I think in terms of bringing the turbines in, that's still an open option we're looking at and talking to the contractors about. So the potential is to bring them the turbine nacelles and blades and tower in down the canal. So that is a potential option that we're using just now.
Question over here.
I just wanted to ask about the confidence we can have in Peel keeping what they say. I'd like to throw a case in point. You've been asked to be a good neighbour. And when the waste incinerator project at Ince was discussed about 6 months ago, Peel actually asked to be excused from upgrading the cycle path alongside the canal. It was one of the initial mentions in the document, and then subsequently they've actually asked, well actually we don't really need to do that and we're not going to put the boat terminal at Ince because we don't need it on the canal. So how much confidence can we have in you keeping to these promises that you make us?
Actually, I'm just going to ask Miles Kitcher to just answer this one, but let me just say something about being a good neighbour. You can never guarantee that the people that speak to you are always going to be working for the same company, and all I can say is the wind farms we have built to date, we have been a good neighbour. I think, you know, we have operating wind farms for a number of years, and we regularly talk to the councillors, and we take visits around the wind farm. We try to create local employment, and so I absolutely think it's part of us, of what we should be doing, is being a good neighbour. If we don't stand up to that, you tell me, and we'll do something about it in that wind farm, and we will be a good neighbour. But I would challenge the statement that people might say that we haven't been a good neighbour, because we have been absolutely a good neighbour in terms of the wind farms we've built today.
Miles Kitcher from Peel. I'm responsible for the Inns Park development. Just 3 points. With regard to access down the ship canal, that was something that was brought up very early on in the consultation, footpaths, cycleways. The reason that wasn't taken forward was for ecological reasons. Originally, the plan there was a large forest and access down the ship canal. The ecologists wanted that area to be open to improve the habitat there and limit access, so we took the footpaths out. So that's the reason why there's no new access down the sides of the ship canal. With regards to the recent change in planning, not doing the berth and the rail works in phase 1, it's not to say we're not going to do them, because we want to do them, that's part of the development. That was purely to make the whole scheme more manageable as far as initial investment's concerned. So it was to reduce the amount of work that was going on in phase 1, to enable the site to open up and development jobs and everything be corrected. So that's the reason for that change. Just picking the gentleman's point, I think he's perhaps left actually, regarding the cutting down of trees around Inns Park. That's true, there has been recently a number of trees trimmed ready for infrastructure works, but part of these first phase of infrastructure is to put around 100-acre new nature reserve in place, so creating new habitat, ponds, etc. for birds, etc., which will ultimately be managed by the Cheshire Wildlife Trust. So it'll be one of the biggest new nature reserves created in Cheshire, or probably in the northwest for some significant period of time. So whilst there is some downside to development, there's also some upside as far as ecology, environment, public access, etc., which is taking place, about to start now.
Sorry, but I felt that the cycle path was the carrot that would have appeased the community, particularly if it was kept in, and them asking to take it out was really, it was a good nature thing that they could have done.
The cycle path, there's still cycle access through the entire Inns Park, which is along Marsh Lane, and a new cycleway which goes in, connecting the old bit of Marsh Lane to the Marsh Lane down towards Frodsham. There's a full new cycle path going in, surfaced, etc. The cycle path, to be very clear, against the ship canal, was nothing of our doing. It was a requirement. Natural England RSPB said we don't want public access into the ship canal because it disturbs the birds, etc. And they want it designed to be an area of wildlife and not quite wilderness, but limited access. They don't want people down there. So that's the reason for public access being taken away from the area alongside the ship canal.
I just want to say, I wanted to pick up on Joe's point that was made first of all, and there were no comments from the panel about that, although it's really good that we're now having a new nature reserve, it doesn't replace what was there initially, and I hope you are taking steps to minimise the damage you're doing to this very interesting ecological site, so that we do retain some of what was there, because nothing can replace what's there now.
I think what will be there I'm talking purely about Inns Park now. As far as Inns Park is concerned, the habitat's vastly better. They'll be far better than it ever was as as agricultural land, and we've worked with the Cheshire Wildlife Trust, with ecologists. It's created these new ponds, new wetlands. So as far as there'll be less. You're right, less natural habitat, but what is left will be significantly of greater quality and of greater importance than what was there originally. Exactly. So there is a baseline. So there's a lot of bird counts looking at the range of bird species, the range of habitat, and afterwards with the Wildlife Trust, we'll be able to look at what the look at how successful it has been. So, and that will be monitored. There's an ecological group which I forget off the top of my head. I can't remember who. Sorry. It'll be run by the Cheshire Wildlife Trust. They'll manage the whole thing, and they'll create a committee that will monitor what they do. So. We're handing over that nature reserve to the Cheshire Wildlife Trust. So we'll fund the works. They'll because it's.
What about the rest of the area? Are you trying to be sensitive to what we do?
Well,
talk about these trees being, you know, is it all being done sensitively?
Yes, it's all been.
That's just one little bit.
There's a full. Well, it's a large area. It's about 200 acres of nature reserve. There's as much nature reserve created as there is development land. So it's a significant area of land. It's true there are trees being cut down currently because to allow the widening of the roads, etc. But they'll be replaced. And so the whole ecological and habitat.
Then the question is: are you going straight from A to B in as quick and cheap as way as possible, or have you explored maybe A to B via D, E, and F as a potential less damaging way to that environment? That's what I think the question is. And has that been properly assessed? Yes, and the answer is it's certainly not the most cost-effective way. We put in a significant amount of, say, new nature reserve. In phase 1, there's more nature reserve than there is development. So we haven't sought to cut back. When we sought to reduce the amount of infrastructure by taking out the berth and the rail from phase 1, we didn't seek to reduce the amount of habitat creation in phase 1. So there's significant consultation with Natural England, RSPB, Cheshire Wildlife Trust, all through the process, and they've been very part of the development. As I say, they shaped what the habitat creation was. We originally had Inns Forest, which they didn't want, so the tree planting was taken out and wetland put in. So there's not a massive amount of tree planting, for example, in the nature reserve because they didn't want that. That's not what the best environmental outcome for the area plan was. So. Consultation-wise, yes, I don't think we can do any more. The management's been handed over to the Wildlife Trust, which we'll be free from. We'll have no influence. All we'll do is fund that work. That funding will be guaranteed for a number of years, and they'll take it forward.
Can we just park some of this just for the moment? The time is actually running out on us. We're horrendously overrunning. But if we can have the groups around the side, the Chester University people and the Peel, there's a table for it, so we've got further questions, if you could ask them there. But at the moment, all I'd like to say is a big thank you to all of the speakers who've given up their time this evening. They've been very open, they've been very honest, and some have been very challenging to them as well, I believe. Thank you all for coming. I know it's getting late for some people, but if we'd like to break out into the subgroups, there's the other projects, there's Andy with the bike project, and there's other projects down the sides there, and I believe we can open the bar for a few minutes if anybody wants to some refreshments. But I think big hand to all of the people who contributed to this evening, and thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.